With the power of Tandem HR, you are in the fast lane on Main Street with Get Down to Business with Shalom Klein, the show for business and jobs. Now, the champion of networking, the advocate of jobs, the guru of business, your host, Shalom Klein.
We are all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship and business. We talk a lot about business here. You are on with Get Down to Business, and I'm your host, Shalom Klein. Remember, you can always download podcasts from Get Down to Business on my website at shalomklein.com. And while you are there, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Shalom Klein. It's going to be a jam-packed week of content and information that you won't want to miss. It's a live show. You can call us at 312-642-5600, 312-642-5600. 5600. We've got a jam-packed lineup. We're going to be talking about some fantastic entrepreneurs, including our next guest, Paul Leinwand, who is an author as well as a business professional from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Really looking forward to our conversation. At the end of the program, I'll be sharing some tips on professional development. Once again, it's a jam-packed lineup of guests. We are brought to you by Tandem HR, your solution center. You can find them at tandemhr.com or give them a call at 630-928-0510, 630-928-0510. So first guest on the program, as promised, is Paul Leinwand, who is with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he's here to talk about strategy that works, about how winning companies close the strategy to execution gap. And that's a subject that I've always been fascinated with. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Shalom.
Of course. So it's funny because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that talk a lot about strategy, and they talk about strategy forever and ever, and they sit in meetings and they strategize, but they never seem to be able to get to the finish line. Tell us a little bit about how, as you said, winning companies are closing that gap.
Well, I think your experience really matches that of executives in general, large companies and small. In fact, in a recent survey, we found that 50% of senior executives said they didn't have a winning strategy, which is pretty concerning. Clearly, there are many that are successful. In the book that you mentioned, we studied 14 in detail, and we found that the real trick in strategy is to think about the connection between strategy and execution. Rather than just designing something exciting you can't execute, design something that's executable. And the real middle ground there is capabilities. It's the things that we do that we can do better than anybody else, and we have to have those. And with those capabilities, we can really connect strategy to execution. So
you have an MBA with distinction from Northwestern's Kellogg Graduate School of Management, where you actually teach, and you've written several books on the subject of basically winning. That's how I would sum it up. I'm curious, is there a personality trait that you see in winners that you think perhaps some of our listeners can try to emulate in their week ahead?
It's a great question, and in the research from this last book, in the 14 companies, we found that there were 5 unconventional acts of leadership. We find that companies follow a lot of conventional wisdom all of the time, and things like growing. And of course, growth is great. We like to grow, but if we don't have that engine of growth, those capabilities, we might actually really not be that successful, not have a right to win in the markets we choose to grow in. I think to your question, one of the acts was all around culture. What we learned from the companies is you've got to put your culture to work. You've got to really find the things that are good about your culture, stop fighting the bad thing, and really use your culture to help execute the strategy. Some of the capabilities that we talk about in the book, like IKEA's design capability, they're actually designers that are out there looking for ways to create furniture and other home goods that are at amazing prices, and they do that very differently. The designers themselves think about all of the implications to cost. If they use 3 colors versus 2, if they shrink it by 3 millimeters, if it can ship in a flat box, what happens to the price? Well, IKEA needs a culture that actually allows that to happen, because you can imagine most companies are very functional. And with functional organizations, we don't always team so well. Well, the culture can really allow you to get past some of those hindrances, some of those challenges. IKEA certainly cares very much about their culture. That's one of those unconventional acts. And IKEA is one of those companies that you've profiled, but you've also mentioned in the book Strategy That Works,
You talk about Amazon, Apple, Lego, Starbucks, which is I have a personal bias towards, Frito-Lay, Pfizer, and Zara. Really interesting examples from all of those companies. But one of the things that you emphasized, which I found interesting, is about an identity profile that sort of encapsulates a company's value proposition, capabilities, and services. And that's bigger than just culture. Culture is sort of an internal thing, but that identity profile is how your customers and how the world looks at you. So for a small business owner, an entrepreneur that's listening to this program, how can they create their own identity profile?
That's great. I mean, as you mentioned, the identity profile is really the core of what a company should define itself as doing. And too many companies, I think, define themselves by the products they sell. And really, through our research, we think companies should define themselves by what they do better than anyone else. And the identity profile has three very simple parts to it. The first is a value proposition. How am I going to create value for my customers? What is the promise that I'm making in terms of why people should care about what I'm doing? The second is the few capabilities, those few differentiated capabilities that allow me to deliver upon that promise. And that's really this whole idea of closing the strategy to execution gap, is in some ways to eliminate it. If we have an aspiration, we got the capabilities, we've essentially designed a strategy that is going to be executable, that's going to be successful. The third element is just to make sure that the products and services that you have in your company, your organization, line up with that promise and line up with those capabilities. Too often, we've gotten into lots of businesses over history. We acquired things. We tried to grow in a bunch of areas. That can create a tremendous amount of incoherence, right? It demands us to try to be great at too many things. What we really want to do is be great at a few things. And so that identity profile means those three elements have to work together coherently.
Interesting. So all of the companies that we mentioned, again, Amazon, Apple, Lego, Starbucks, IKEA, and many others that you've profiled in the book, Strategy That Works. What is it that the executives of those companies, and I realize a company like Apple has gone through that transition of a Steve Jobs to a Tim Cook, Starbucks, I've always been fascinated by Howard Schultz. What is it that the leadership of those organizations have in them that people can emulate?
Well, I think, first of all of the companies in our book, the leaders were very focused on building something sustainable. They had that great aspiration, but they also built the amazing capabilities behind. You mentioned Apple. I mean, Steve Jobs was certainly a genius, but he was genius at also building these amazing areas where they could be better than anyone else. Again, even their design capability, hiring fashion designers from fashion companies, which was very breakthrough for a tech company, but it's served them incredibly well over a long period of time. And so I think these leaders recognize the value of what the company did, those capabilities, those few things. They had to be better than anyone else. Jeff Bezos often says, there's a famous quote from him, which I'll get close. I'm often asked the question, what's going to change? I'm not often asked the question, what's not going to change? And the latter of those two is probably more important. And he refers to all the capabilities that they've been focused on in their supply chain and around pricing and the way they communicate with customers. Those things are always important. You have to innovate. You have to change the way you do them, but you've got to stay ahead. You've got to be focused on the things you do incredibly well. And so I think leadership has to sort of grasp these 5 different areas, and many of these companies demonstrate that incredibly well.
Wow. Well, again, we're chatting with Paul Leinwand, the author of several books, including Strategy That Works, How Winning Companies Close the Strategy to Execution Gap, and really fascinating lessons from big companies. But I will take out of this that I believe that entrepreneurs and small business owners can bring something, again, into their week, into their daily strategy. It's great to have execution, but it also is very important to have the strategy behind it as well. So, Paul, I hope our listeners will be able to get a copy of the book. How can people learn more?
The easiest place is to go to strategythatworks.com.
strategythatworks.com. Paul, we appreciate your time, and I hope we'll be hearing from you again about future works, as well as to continue discussion on the fascinating book, Strategy That Works. Once again, you could find it online at strategythatworks.com. Paul, thanks for joining us on the program.
Shalom, thanks so much.
Of course, Get Down to Business is also brought to you in part by Everett Wealth Solutions, registered investment advisor and financial planning firm, a fiduciary advisor that helps you create your personal wealth. You can find them at everettwealthsolutions.com or give them a call. Easiest phone number to remember, 708-771-7777, 708-771-7777, 708-771-7777. After the break, we're going to be chatting with Brad Hedich of Commercial Lending X. We're going to be learning a little bit about what small businesses can do to secure financing for their ideas that we just talked about with Paul Leinwand. Really great discussion. We've got a great show lined up for you. At the end of the program, I'll be sharing some professional development tips. As always, get on my website, shalomklein.com, to download podcasts from the show and find out who will be on next week. The show that's all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. You're listening to Get Down to Business. I'm your host, Shalom Klein. Chicago, don't touch that dollar. We've got a lot more in store for you.
Stuck?